On our next JavaScript adventure, we're going to work with the GeoLocation API. This will allow us to request the location information of the web page, and this grabs the information related to where the server is that is serving that web page is locally viewed. So a user who is requesting their current position will get the latitude and longitude information of where they currently are. So before we look at the JavaScript, let's take a moment to look at the documentation on the GeoLocation API. So when we use the get current position, as we will work with that, then what we're going to do under get current position, we will see that it has a couple parameters: success, error, and options. We're not going to worry about options right now. That's not necessary for the kind of thing that we're going to be working on. But we do want to take a look at success and error and what they work with. So when we look at an example here, we will see that get current position, when we call it, so we tell our user agent navigator to use the geolocation API, and then we're going to use the get current position method, and it has these callback functions that it's going to ask for. We're only going to use success and error. So we'll see we will write a function for success and we'll write a function for error. And looking at this, we can see how it passes in some information. So we're going to look at the documentation that relates to both the success using our position information and the error, which gives us our code and message. So if I look at GeoPosition, we'll see that it will provide back coordinates, which is latitude and longitude, and timestamp information. You can also see it's compatible in nearly all browsers except for Internet Explorer unsecure, but we're not going to worry about that at the moment because that's older. Now if we look at coordinates, we'll see that it now is going to give us latitude and longitude options as part of it. So it will give us that data when we're asking for it. So when we look here, we can say that the position, so when we get current position, we call the success function, we're going to be passing in the position information. That position coordinates will be our latitude, because coordinates has a latitude property and a longitude property. We're not going to concern ourselves with accuracy. We don't need that right now. We just need latitude and longitude. Now moving on to error, we'll see that error has both an error code and a message that is tied to it. So we can now print out both that error code and that error message, so that if there is a problem trying to retrieve the location, we will provide that information to them. So when reading the documentation, as we look at this, what we can do is see, okay, this is the example of what's going on. Let's try and find out a little bit more about what these things are, and then we find these links in here that we can click on. That brings us to the page that then gives us more detail or information as to what it's going to provide back to us. So every time we're using an API like this, what we're doing is we are now asking for information, and we get that information back. And this is similar to what we'll be doing shortly with our open weather map, where we will make a request for JSON, and we're going to have to look at that JSON a little bit to try and understand how to work with the data that comes back, so we can extract from that data the specific parts that we are looking for. The page that we'll be working with, we can see we have a button, and then we have no location yet. We are going to click on the button. When I click on the button, it's going to replace that text with my latitude and longitude information. So let's get started on the JavaScript. At the HTML, we will see that I have a button and I have a paragraph. The button is what we will attach our event listener to. So when I click on that button, it's going to change the text content of this paragraph. And the rest of it's just some CSS that's contained up there. So we'll start out, and because this is a very simple thing, what we can do is just do a simple document query selector, and then the selector we're looking for is going to be our button, which is find location, and then we'll tell that to add event listener, and we'll listen for a click, and then we'll say geo lookup and false. So one thing you'll notice here is I didn't make a variable to hold a reference to the button and then add the event listener. We're just taking and adding the event listener to it because on a simple project like this we don't necessarily have to add in additional variable references. We can just dump it directly in. The next thing that we will do is we will define out that function of geolookup. So function geolookup, and now this function is going to need to do a couple of different things. It's going to need to gain control of our status paragraph so that we can change the text in it, and then it's going to need the success and error methods that are part of doing the geolocation, and then it's going to make a request of the browser to perform the geolocation lookup. So the first thing I will do is set a reference to my status paragraph there. So we're looking for status. So now we have a link to that. The next thing I want to do is to write out my if statement here, and my if statement is going to say navigator. So we say if navigator cannot do geolocation, then we want to set our text content. So this is not an error message from doing geolocation. This is telling us that our web browser can't do or is being denied permission to do geolocation. So now we can make that statement there, but we'll follow it with an else, and this is where we get to do the fun stuff. So we will update the text content while we're doing our search here, and we will set it equal to, so I'm going to set it equal to locating. So the text content of my status bar will say locating while we're trying to locate, and then we will tell our navigator geolocation, and all lowercase is the syntax that we use here. We don't have to go with camel casing or capital letters. So navigator geolocation, and then get current with a capital C on current, position, capital P on position. And then we're going to call both the success and error methods. So we don't have to do error, but it's a good idea so that if something happens, you're providing feedback to the user. So that's always an important thing to do. So we can save this. Document saved. I'm going to click on location. We can see how the text changed to locating, but we can also see how we're getting an error message here. Success is not defined, so it broke. Remember, we're trying to have success. So we can see that our browser does support geolocation, so it's not giving us that message, but it is now saying locating. So we need to define the two functions. So we will have function success, and this is going to pass in a parameter of position, and I will have a function of error, and this will pass in our error parameter. So now if I save this and click on show my location, we will see now it's asking for permission. So if I block it, then it doesn't work. Let's try again. All right, and now it's stopped, so I will have to, as I see in my bar up here, so I can clear that setting, and now I can say allow. No error messages, now it's working. So if the user does block it, then it will stay blocked, but we do have the option in our browser to modify it. We'll see it does give that notification that, hey, this web page is tracking your location, which just about every shopping website does that now. It wants to be able to show you the details and pricing in your region, so it will provide that kind of information. Going back into our document here, now we get the fun part of defining out things. We're going to go with the low-hanging fruit, the easy option, and we'll work on the error method first. We will change the text content for the status message, and we will set that equal to, now I'm using tick marks, using a string literal. So we'll say unable to retrieve your location. And then we will provide the error code and the error message. So we'll say error, and then list the code. So $ curly brace. Remember, I'm obtaining the syntax for this directly from the documentation. So it's always useful to try and read that and make sense out of it. Look at the samples that are provided, look at the documentation, and then adapt it to your own use. So again, I'm using the tick marks, I'm using the string literals with the $ and the curly braces, so I can put a variable directly in my code there. So that now gives us the error message. To handle working with success, what we're going to do is create two values, and I will make one for latitude and one for longitude. And for this, I will take the position that is passed into this upon success, and then reading the documentation, we notice that it now gives us a coordinates value, and that coordinates then has a sub-value of latitude, and then we're going to have the same for longitude, and it will be position, coordinates, and longitude. So now that gives us access to both of those, and we can just simply update the text content of status. We'll use a string literal again, and I'll say lat for my latitude, $ curly brace latitude, close curly brace, comma, lon, colon, $ curly brace longitude. So now that gives us the latitude and longitude for what we're doing. If I click here, locating, and sometimes it takes a little bit of time to come up, and now I can see I have that information. So I have detailed latitude and detailed longitude for my geolocation where I'm currently at. And if I were to then copy paste this, say, into Google Maps, I could then map out exactly where I was. In this case, we're going to use this information to map out where we are for retrieving weather.